Welcome to Into the Woo, a wellness podcast hosted by Alice Hu. I'll be exploring the world of crystals, energy healing, spirit guides, and more to help you understand how they can unlock your potential. These concepts have helped me discover my purpose and my truth, and I can't wait to hear how they will inspire you. I'll show you how they can be accessible and powerful tools in your life. More and more people are seeking shamans, healers, psychics, other practitioners to help them in their healing process. This can be really overwhelming because there are just so many choices. Do you go the more traditional route and see a psychiatrist or a psychologist? Or do you speak to a shaman, to a sound healer, to an energy healer? On today's episode with Ryan Muffi, psychotherapist, we talk about, how do we navigate the different options for modern day healing and his advice on whether you need a therapist, psychiatrist, and how to start, where to start. I add in my opinions on how to select someone in the holistic wellness field. How do you know which shaman to choose, which healer? Ryan also shares a new tool, a new modality that he learned, I think, just a couple months ago called brainspotting. It's something that I hope that we can do a workshop on in the coming months. Enjoy this episode.
Yeah, it all started for me when I took a Psychology 101 class in high school, and I had not an inkling about what mental health was, what emotional health was, what really, wellness was. And when I took this class, I was just kind of blown away by having a sort of map for guiding, how I can interact with people, how I can relate to myself, how I can understand the world. I just felt like this sense of empowerment when I started to learn psychological theories. And it gave me a lot of insight too. It gave me a lot of insight about what I was going through as well. I thought life was really hard and life was really stressful. And then from learning a little bit more about mental and emotional health, I realized, oh, actually, this is on the spectrum of stress and anxiety. So the field itself helped me to heal and then become a healer through psychotherapy. So I became really interested in mental health towards the end of my bachelor's degree. I went to Towson University, and while there, I realized I really wanted to specialize in mental health. I was really interested after I really did a lot of self-work on healing with anxiety. I really wanted to specialize in it, so I kind of went full throttle through the bachelor's program and then a clinical psychology master's program, and just doing what I could to learn about treating mental health concerns. So anywhere from anxiety, depression, trauma or stress, times where someone has wounds from growing up, in a household with a lot of dysfunction or a lot of adverse experiences. Just learned about generally how to treat, a wide variety of concerns. And so after the master's program and doing, an internship in psychology, where I was seeing clients while under a lot of supervision from the school and from, an internship supervisor, I was able to graduate, take a kind of a national standardized test called the NCE, and become a therapist myself. So after 2 additional years of practicing, I earned what's called the licensed clinical professional counselor license. So that allows me to practice on my own and be kind of a standalone psychotherapist.
Nice. And for those who are listening and they've never seen a therapist, a psychologist, what would you say for someone who's never even thought about it or has just started to think, maybe it might be a good idea just to check in with someone, even though I feel okay, I feel good. Why would someone who isn't experiencing, let's say, acute anxiety or depression see a therapist.
Right. I'm really reminded of this model of mental health and wellness called the dual continuum model. And it kind of says there's one spectrum, of mental health conditions or mental health symptoms. So that's what you were speaking to about, like maybe anxiety or depression or trauma. And that kind of exists on a spectrum from someone experiencing more symptoms to less symptoms. But there's like another spectrum that exists that we don't think about as often. And that's kind of a flourishing to languishing spectrum. So that kind of takes into account our mental wellness and well-being. So I think about, how in touch am I with my purpose and meaning in life? How how connected am I with people around me? Like, am I able to take in compliments, gratitude, love? Am I able to give those things? How invested am I in my career or my other roles in life, like relationships or extracurricular roles. So times where we might feel like a lack of investment in those things, lack of purpose, lack of meaning, lack of real zest for life, those might be times where we check in and we say, maybe there's more. Maybe there's more to living that I'm not quite accessing right now. So I would just say, I mean, I think that is a question that can well up within us. Like, is there more than this? Am I living to my fullest? I think when those questions start to well up in us, can be really important to find a path to healing. And psychotherapy is definitely a path that someone can try. And yeah.
Can you explain a little bit more about that scale, or like flourishing and languishing? Like, what does that really mean?
Sure. Yeah, so it's kind of, rather than looking at things from do I have like tangible mental health symptoms, like a lot of worry, a lot of anxiety, a lot of rumination and dwelling, hearing voices or seeing things, whatever comes with mental health symptoms for someone. Instead of looking at it whether there's the presence or absence of those symptoms, it's kind of flourishing to languaging. Languishing is kind of saying, do I feel like I am reaching my potential in life for how much I, am in touch with positive and pleasurable emotions? Like, am I in touch with the spectrum of feeling? When something good happens, do I have a felt sense of excitement? When I have, positive exchanges with someone in relationship, am I feeling like a sense of gratitude about that, or connection or meaning about that? um, Even thinking about, maybe I'm performing well enough in my career, but am I getting a sense of meaning from it? So all of these kind of positive experiences, like the meaning, gratitude, love, care, etc., those would all be towards feeling like you're flourishing in life. And then when we feel like there's an absence of those positive things, we may call that languishing. So it really points out that just because we're holding things down and at home, in our career, in our life, and there's not any crises or fires to put out, there can still be things that are missing. So it's kind of looking at like, what it's kind of a going towards what's positive in life, like well-being, rather than just focusing on eliminating um, illness or a condition or a symptom. It's kind of like, when I feel okay, how can I get to the next level of feeling like more actualized?
Yes, completely. And I know that's why people reach out to me, whether they come to a workshop, they attend a sound bath, really just searching for something more. It really starts quite small and then it expands to purpose and what is my truth? What am I meant to do? And it's the difference between good and great. Everything could be fine, could be good, but it's almost like you've hit a plateau,
I
right?
so resonate with that. I so resonate with that. Yes.
And so as humans, like we need to continually grow and experience new things. And when we've kind of plateaued, that's when we feel kind of like a restlessness of like, like this, it feels like the same for quite some time. And what people don't understand about mental health, and I explain this when I share about rituals and mindfulness and meditation, is you're not supposed to do these when you feel bad. You're supposed to do them all the time, because when you're feeling great, nothing is wrong. Having these habits, these routines, really builds resilience.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Yeah, it's kind of half the battle is, or half of it is, feeling okay. And then the other half is like going that extra mile to feel great, like really fulfilling kind of, finding, yeah, the meaning of life or feeling full.
And I think so much like people are just surviving, right? They're
Mhm.
living paycheck to paycheck or vacation to vacation.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And it can feel like surviving or treading water. You're just getting by when there
Hmm.
could be more.
Yes, and I feel like when we talk about therapy, it's
Hmm.
really about processing emotions, because we don't actually ever quite learn how to process emotions.
I completely agree. So there's so much around emotions, and yeah, I can maybe a little later I can tell you a little bit about how I practice, but it's very aligned with that, the importance of emotions.
Because like as I think, I'm like, did they ever teach us like K through 12? Not really. There's never really like a class for that. Like, and if your family, if your parents don't really know how to process their emotions, then you really inherit that as well.
So true. Yeah, we're totally missing out on a lot of emotion education. I know if me or even, clients I serve, if we would know at an early age that we are wired to experience this spectrum of emotion, fear, anger, disgust, sadness, excitement, sexual excitement, all of, the whole spectrum of different emotions and drives. If we know that's normal and that each of these emotions helps to guide us in a direction that serves us, we could be so much better off, because we spend so long pushing down emotions or feeling like they're too distressing or too quote unquote bad, without realizing that they can be so helpful to us. I mean, I'll even take, anger, for instance. With anger on the surface, it could look like aggression or being a perpetrator or being mean or lashing out. But really, we're wired to experience anger to stick up for ourselves, to have what, a quote unquote backbone, to that it can propel us to overcome obstacles. So I think I think it's really a beautiful process of therapy is when people I work with will kind of reclaim these emotions that they pushed down for so long. And someone who may have felt really passive their entire life, when we get back in touch with what are they about, who are they angry about, and how does that anger want to speak or move, they can really kind of become reactivated and come back into their power, to set boundaries with people, to say no. And it's a really exciting process. And it's just like one emotion and just a couple examples.
Yeah. And I feel like if like most people, it's hard for them to process their emotions. It's even more difficult to communicate
Mm-hmm.
how they're feeling and what they need. And so, that's already so many different things that someone needs to walk through. And then there comes into the space of healing and mental health. Right now, it's very much so, I think, blurred lines, right? So there's many different types of people that you can see that are licensed, but then there are people that you can see who are counselors, various healers, psychics, energy reader and healers. There's just so many different options. And so I'd love for you to walk us through the different options one has. And I have it written down because It's a lot. There's an
Yeah.
MFT, there's LCSW, there's a PsyD, a PhD. Of course, we have LCPC, licensed clinical professional counselor, which is what you are. And so, like, where does someone start if they're like, hey, like, I think I want to check in with myself a little bit more mentally and emotionally, like everything that we've been talking about has kind of sparked an interest in them. Like, where should they start and who should they see?
Right. Great question. Yeah. So it's so interesting because there's a lot of different licenses and titles, and sometimes they do similar things to a certain extent. So I would say I would separate. I would kind of say on. I can kind of break them down. So, for instance, I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor, as you said, and for me, I will use discussions in therapy, activities about like staying with emotions, or like facilitating meditations, or processing traumas and emotional experiences to completion, and work on identifying new ways of communicating and relating to each other in session, to help someone heal and also cope with mental health experiences. So someone might come in with anxiety or stress, or also they may feel depression, so they might feel like they don't have much energy, or they're not motivated, or they're having difficulty finding purpose. And so anything on this kind of mental health spectrum, they can see someone like me, a licensed clinical professional counselor. And similarly, there's kind of different levels of education someone can get in terms of being a psychotherapist. So, when I practice with clients, it's called psychotherapy, meaning therapy of the mind, or of, kind of taking into account someone's feelings, thoughts, and behaviors. I work with kind of those three. And similarly, a PsyD would do the same thing. That's a doctorate in psychology. And a lot of the times, a PsyD is really well trained. They go through a doctorate program on how to heal through psychotherapy. So they're getting a lot of schooling and experience and practice in this. So if someone wants someone who had a ton of schooling in mental health therapy, a PsyD would be a great choice. And also a PhD, meaning that they have a doctorate in both the science and the practice of psychotherapy. So a lot of the times, PhD psychotherapists will have kind of a research focus, or they might be a faculty member at a university as well as practicing psychotherapy. So, they'd be a great fit for someone who has like especially someone who has a very specific concern that they wanted help with, to know that someone has spent their life's work researching and working with a client of that specialty. They could feel really helped by a PhD psychotherapist. For instance, someone with dissociative identity disorder, they have different, so, someone with like a very specific mental health condition, they might, want to seek out someone who has a lot of schooling and experience, on a specific concern. So, so those are a few of them. And then you were mentioning marriage and family therapists, and they're a type of therapist that works with clients both with mental health and also a lot in relationships and marriages. So times where couples are facing, infidelity, or times where there's, fighting, where they're feeling like they're not flourishing as a couple. Maybe they're facing a life transition like marriage or even divorce and so forth. A marriage and family therapist, that would be like a huge specialty for them that they can, really, really do good work in. There's art therapy as well, times where people, are checking in with themselves and they're saying, I think that healing for me could happen through a lot of expression, through art, through expressive modalities. And I need to go beneath the story, beneath the words that I'm speaking. Art can be a great way to get there. So there's a specific therapy, a licensed therapy called art therapy. And clients can go to art therapists and heal a lot through that modality as well. And similar to me as a licensed clinical professional counselor, there's another master's level psychotherapist could be a licensed clinical social worker. And social workers would get similar schooling. They actually, I think study a lot of broader topics in addition to therapy. They might work in understanding like public policy and laws and how communities function to support people who have mental health and other concerns. And and generally, so they might be a little bit more quote unquote like macro focused in addition to having that kind of micro focus of focusing on an individual's emotional health.
Okay. And then we have the psychiatrist.
Yes. So I was speaking before about more of that the therapist realm and the different types of licensed therapists, and then there's also the kind of prescriber realm, and prescribers practice prescribing medicine to help clients alleviate mental health symptoms or have fewer symptoms or cope in the short term so that they can get by at home, work, school, and other other responsibilities as they do healing so that they can then get off medication. There's a lot of ways medication can help someone. But generally, a lot of the times those are MDs, so medical doctors. And so someone who's been through medical school, or I think it's a doctor of osteopathic medicine or OD, they can become psychiatrists and prescribe medications. So they have a ton of schooling on medical health and mental health. So they can prescribe medications. And same with nurse practitioners. People can get, or professionals can get doctorates and bachelor's and master's level nursing degrees and specialize in psychiatric nursing. So they can be well equipped to prescribe medicine for mental health concerns. And so there's these kind of two different umbrellas of like the therapies and also times where medication is prescribed. And a lot of the times it works best when there's kind of integration between the two. If someone is utilizing both, it can be so helpful for there to be kind of for someone to utilize both if they're going through a lot.
Okay. So you'd recommend seeing like a therapist first and then maybe a psychiatrist if necessary, but the therapist would be a good place to start.
Right. I would say it doesn't hurt getting, at the first session of both a therapist and a psychiatrist, someone receives an evaluation or an assessment appointment, and then that professional will tell them their recommendations. So if someone's kind of on the border on either of them, I would recommend going through with an appointment and kind of seeing what the recommendations are. Yeah, I think a lot of the times when someone doesn't have severe difficulty functioning, so if they're like, I'm holding on to my friendships, I'm holding on to my job, and, my relationship or my marriage isn't threatened by my emotional concerns or my mental health concerns. I think a lot of the times going with, the therapy route is really helpful first, to see if, different modalities can be used to help someone heal from within. Before seeing if medication would be helpful. But as someone who's not a professional prescriber of medication, I can't speak too much to, what's appropriate and what's not. But I would say as a therapist, I definitely recommend clients reaching out for for medication, especially if therapy isn't giving them the result they want. If they've been trying to heal for a long time and it seems like when they go to heal from within, they're still being met with a lot of symptoms, or if they're going through, crises, for instance, anxiety so severe that it's hard to get to work, or anger, so severe that, there's conflict that is getting in the way of their marriage, or, depression that, is so impactful that, it's really hard to get out of bed and do things that are enjoyable to them, so, despite, trying, other pathways of healing. So just times where they need more immediate relief, I think medications can be helpful too.
And I think this is why the wellness space has expanded so much in the last few years. And so many people are seeking, energy healers, sound
Mm-hmm.
healers. I'm a sound healer. People can lead them through meditation, mindfulness. There's just so many different options. And I think it's because for those people who are like, well, I don't really feel like anything's really particularly wrong, but I do want something more. And I think, this is a good segue to talk about how do you pick the right one? A lot of times for a therapist or a psychiatrist, that's like something insurance will like cover. And of course, like finding someone who's licensed is extremely important. But when we're talking about, like a shaman or an energy healer, that gets a little bit murkier, especially because there is no standard license for these types of things.
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult to do so. And it's very much so about trust and the relationship that you're able to have with this person, because a lot of times it's a connection via social media because you like what they share and you're able to experience some of those new modalities. And you're like, this really resonates with me. For example, I share a lot of sound healing on my Instagram, on my YouTube, my website. And so someone could see these things and say, wow, like I really love how I feel after I do a sound bath meditation with Alice. Subsequently, other things as well. But it's just becomes difficult because, how do you choose? And what I always say to people is to see if you like how they share what they do on social media or websites or interviews, and to really follow your intuition, because, there are a lot of, bad healers. There's a lot of bad therapists out there too. So it's really just about finding the right fit and honing in on like how you are feeling and tapping into your emotions, right? So, what are some things that you think are important that people look out for when they're seeking a therapist?
Yes. Oh, yeah. And I just want to, double down on that. The fit is so important for all paths to healing. I think in psychological research, that's among the highest correlates to having a successful outcome, is having a good therapeutic relationship can transcend even the techniques that's used or the amount of experience the therapist has. So the relationship itself is so important. So I think you spoke a lot to some of the guiding points here. So in therapy, someone can really use the internet to their advantage. There is Psychology Today, which offers a find a therapist tool. And I would say that's the most prominent find a therapist tool I've seen. And you can actually file it down. You can actually like filter your search by gender of the therapist, whether the therapist is, affirming of, LGBT clients or Black, Indigenous people of color, if the therapist is like spiritually affirming. You can also find out if the therapist practices a specific modality or type of therapy that fits with you. For instance, if someone feels like they have negative thoughts and the negative thoughts that come into their mind are creating like uncomfortable emotions, and if they just change their thoughts about themselves, the world, and situations, they'd find relief. They might be a really good candidate for cognitive behavioral therapy. So they could find a therapist that takes that type of therapy. If a client is really interested in like finding what is meaningful to them and where they find value in their life, and they want to go towards their values like relationships or their spirituality, despite obstacles and symptoms they're experiencing, while kind of practicing, like having kind of a meditative presence and quality, they might be a great fit for acceptance and commitment therapy. And, and then other clients who maybe feel like they have years and years of experiences that they haven't quite processed yet. And those emotions like grief or sadness or anger and all are kind of welling up inside them, waiting to be released. But it's really hard because it's hard to hold those emotions, or they feel like anxiety or shame or guilt kind of push those emotions down, or they find themselves doing a lot of things to defend themselves from experiencing emotions. That's when other more motion processing types of therapies might be helpful. So that, processing therapies could be like I practice accelerated experiential dynamic psychotherapy. There's expressive modalities that can help someone express emotion. Experiential therapies in general work with emotions in the felt sense. Somatic experiencing, which touches base with a lot of how the body is holding different emotions and situations and helping to find release in that. And and so like there's really just endless possibilities for someone. So I would say doing some research on what types of healing with psychotherapy is out there, and then finding a therapist based on that, and then noticing if your intuition is saying this person seems like a good fit based on the tone of their voice, what their approach is. If you have a phone consultation with them and you get good energy or vibes from them, those are all going to be, important factors.
And I like to describe, like, sometimes it's confusing because someone could think like, well, I don't know what that means. Intuition. And it's really about, if you're talking to someone, like how your body is reacting to that conversation, how it's engaging, and also, after the conversation, how you feel. Do you feel a little bit like, oh, I have so much to do, I have so much to unpack? Or do you feel like, I feel good, I think I have some new tools to incorporate into how I manage my stress or anxiety?
Yes, I think that's so important. Yeah, after receiving any type of, session in terms of mental health therapy or other, it'd be very important, to check in and say, did I experience a felt sense of relief? Yeah, or do I have a new way of looking at things that is gonna help me, move forward with life?
Mm-hmm.
Or do I have a new way of relating to myself and others? So someone generally can look for a felt change in their body, a change in thoughts to being more helpful and positive thoughts, or also a change in their behavior. Like, do I still feel compelled to, fight with my partner? Or do I still feel like I need to have that drink after work, given that I just did this work on anxiety? So I would say those are a few ways, that someone might check in with themselves to see if it's going well.
And I want you to repeat what you said earlier about how the relationship is almost even more important than the techniques and the modality or specialty that the therapist is trained in.
Right. So, so the relationship is so important. And I'll bring this kind of to, I do a lot of emotion processing in my work. So, with all of us, we're wired to experience all these emotions. And what I've been learning from the type of therapy I mainly practice, which is accelerated experiential dynamic psychotherapy, or AEDP, it's a mouthful. With this type of therapy, there's a lot of interest in noticing what experiences someone has had in the past or present moment that they didn't feel safe enough or get the chance to process. So maybe as a kid, they experienced a lot of sadness around the loss of a grandparent or a pet. And then when they went to experience sadness, they may have been shamed by a peer or a parent or someone else in their life. And they thought to themselves, oof, in order to maintain my connection with this friend or this parent or this teacher, or whoever I was showing sadness with and I got shamed, in order to maintain that connection, I need to shut this feeling down. So what happens is they create ways of defending themselves from experiencing emotion, which is quite clever and resilient in a way, because it simply cannot be safe for a lot of people. So maybe they, start to, like, maybe in 2020 nowadays, it's like maybe going on social media and kind of numbing out by going through all the TikToks, or kind of Netflix and chilling until like the end of the entire day. Or, it could go to like feeling like they develop, into an adult, and they feel like they have to use substances to push down their emotions. So by the time someone goes to seek help, they might have a lot of experiences that they haven't processed yet, and all of that emotion is kind of still held in their body, kind of waiting to be released. And once that emotion is processed, then they can have a sense of relief, and what they were doing to push down the emotion no longer needs to be there as much. So that those kind of parts of them that felt responsible for numbing out or distracting from emotion now feel like they don't have to be there as much. So there's a sort of softening of defenses around emotions. And so where the therapeutic relationship comes in is that in order for someone to process emotions, they have to feel safe enough to do that relationally with someone else or with themselves. And they have to feel like the emotion is manageable. So when they have a trusted therapist or a trusted other in their life who is really there to help them hold their emotional experience, or can give them tools for making sure their emotion isn't too overwhelming for them, or to find a way to really ride the waves of the emotion and get to the other side of relief, then they can do that emotional healing work. So without the safety and attunement of a therapist, it can be really difficult. So if they had a therapist who the fit just wasn't right, or to them the therapist felt a little checked out, or wasn't really like noticing how they were feeling, or how their emotions were changing in session, they might not feel safe enough to like drop down into that emotion. So that's kind of the gist there.
That makes a lot of sense. And with AEDP, like, can you describe a little bit more about how you're able to, walk through, the various techniques of this modality to help someone process emotion?
Sure. I know so I would say in AEDP, it was invented by or founded by Dr. Diana Fosha, and she's up in New York. And then there was also recently a self-help book that popularized, the method and showed it to the general public. And that's a book called "It's Not Always Depression" by Hilary Jacobs Hendel. That's where I actually learned about, this style of therapy and began training. So I'm training in this theory. I'm in no way, affiliated with the organization or like a faculty member. But yeah, I'll speak to how I use it as a therapist. So generally we follow this it's called the triangle of experience, or recently it was kind of popularized as the change triangle. And if you can imagine an upside down triangle, and this is and it has kind of the 3 points, the bottom point, the upper left point, and the upper right point. The very bottom of the triangle represents our core emotions. So the ones we're wired to experience, like that movie Inside Out. So like sadness, anger, fear, disgust, excitement, sexual excitement. So all of those emotions. So that's kind of the goal, is to drop down to that bottom part of the triangle and process the emotions. But what frequently happens is when we go to feel, our mind doesn't feel like it's safe, especially based on the past. Like maybe before there was a traumatic incident or a hostile like family environment or unaffirming people, and it made it so that it wasn't safe to experience the emotions. So someone would go into what you might call the upper right-hand side of the triangle, which is experiencing inhibitory emotions. So these are emotions that push down our core emotions. So that's like anxiety is one, and depression is, or not depression, anxiety is a big one, and shame and guilt are big ones. So instead of someone feeling sad, that they, didn't do well on a test, and kind of, grieving the loss of, or grieving that kind of the lack of performance and feeling kind of sad about it, and having the sadness drive them to getting support from others, or, leading them to feel kind of like a sense of relief if they cry or are with that sense of sadness. Instead, a lot of the times people don't feel safe to have that sadness. So they'll go up to anxiety, which kind of says, we need to, it's kind of this kind of nervousness, anxiousness, on edge feeling. Their heart might be palpitating more. They might notice a shortness in breathing, and that kind of restricts them from feeling the emotion. And same with shame, like, oh, I shouldn't have, I'm bad because I didn't do well on this test or this assignment or this work project. That would be another time where someone's in that upper right-hand side of the triangle. So those emotions are keeping them out of their core emotions. And then when those become unbearable, they're in the upper left-hand side of the triangle, which is defenses. So, maybe someone who is using substances to cope, or someone who, when they go to get support from someone, they're very vague about it and don't really give examples, and don't really lean into it, and so forth. Or, what I was talking earlier about social media, or using that to numb. But whatever the case may be, they're in one of these different kind of points of the triangle. So in therapy, I'm kind of cognizant of that, like kind of map for navigating it. So if they're in their defenses and they're doing something to numb, like I help them like notice and acknowledge what they're doing to avoid experiencing emotions. So sometimes if someone's being vague, I might just say, oh, would you mind giving me like an example of that? And maybe that drops them right into the emotion of it. However, if maybe they're noticing that, in session, they're switching the subject, we might notice the part of them that wants to switch the subject because it feels too painful to talk about what we were just talking about. And we can kind of work with that part of them and, see if that part of them is willing to, take one step to the side and allow them to drop in back into the conversation or back into the feeling of it. So there's a lot of things we can do to soften defenses. Just bringing their awareness and bringing compassion to those defenses, though, is a really big factor. And then when they go towards the anxiety, shame, and guilt part, that can, you can use a lot of formal like breathing techniques, meditation, coping skills, and grounding skills. So, it might be, noticing how it is to do diaphragmatic breathing. So breathing so that, the belly expands and deflates, and that can help regulate anxiety. Or kind of noticing how the body is in the room or on the chair, and, how it is to have the feet planted on the ground. And so, different kind of mindfulness or grounding skills can help them regulate their anxiety in session. And then when they're kind of ready to go down to the bottom of the triangle, it might be a matter of having, asking their permission to see if they would be willing to notice how their body is experiencing the emotion. So like, what is the felt sense on your body? Is there they might say, oh, there's a tightness in my chest, or a burning sensation, or maybe a knot in my stomach, or a weight somewhere. And it might be a matter of being kind of having a focused mindfulness around that. So just staying with that, inviting, the relationship in. So like, can you stay with that with me? And also getting them back in touch with what those emotions want to do, because they didn't always feel safe to use their emotions to guide them, like use their innate wisdom to guide them. So I might help them notice, what does this anger want to do? Or what does this anger want to say? To see if they can connect that emotion to what you might call like the adaptive action tendency. So what the emotion was designed to help them with. So they can feel like the emotion is like processing and also leading them to act in how they want to. So for instance, someone who processes like anger to more of a completion might feel more equipped upon leaving the session to, say no to a friend that keeps asking them to, push their comfort level on what they do. Maybe in the time of COVID, the friend wants to hang out with like another friend outside their pod, and this person is like, I don't feel safe to do that, but they're having difficulty saying no. Like if we process anger in session, they're going to be more in touch with how that anger can protect them. Like, no, it's my right to say no, to keep myself safe. And I have the right to set a boundary with my friend in a respectful way. So that's kind of a roadmap.
Yeah, so the triangle really helps you to understand what is an emotion and what is something that may be blocking the emotion, a feeling that you might be experiencing, like anxiety, and then something like a coping mechanism, drinking, or another type of substance abuse, because these three things can be confused for one another, or they layer on top of one another.
So true, so true. And I think it brings a lot of compassion to the space. Like, you are, of course you're doing this, because a lot of the times we're in households or in cultures, people are kind of shamed for how they numb their emotions. So for instance, substance use has a lot of shame around it. And, if working with someone, you're able to say, hey, this is like a way that you've tried to survive, your traumas or your stresses or these deep, really hard to bear feelings. This was a way that you tried to, to regulate how you were feeling, and kind of honoring that, that pure intention of trying to regulate. And then bringing awareness to kind of what the cost of that defense is.
Yeah.
But ultimately it brings a lot of compassion. Same with anxiety. It's like, oh, we can befriend that anxious feeling because it's just trying to keep you from feeling pain. And it doesn't necessarily, that anxiety feeling doesn't necessarily know that you can feel relief if you lean into your emotions and ride them through.
Yeah. And you had mentioned to me about brain spotting, which is a very new technique, which seems really interesting. So tell me a little bit more about what it is and what it's like for someone to experience this brain spotting technique.
Sure, yeah. So brain spotting is one that I'm just getting familiar with now, and I went through a first phase of training, so I'm able to deliver it. And yeah, it's pretty incredible. So brain spotting, the short of it is that where we, and I'm kind of coining all of this from the founder of it, Dr. David Grand. He was a eye movement desensitization reprocessing, or EMDR, therapist, where you have someone move their eyes back and forth, or have stimulation with sound or vibrations from one side of their body to the other. But there's a sort of like, it incorporates both sides of both hemispheres of the brain while someone processes through trauma. So it's like a deeper level of processing than if someone just talks about it. But what he found was that where we look in our visual field affects how we feel. So, and then he paired that with therapy. So, in therapeutic modality. So with brain spotting, it basically is helping a client to talk about what is going on and noticing how that feels in their body. And then also finding a place on their visual field that that brings that feeling to a little bit more to the foreground, or brings that situation a little bit to the foreground. And what they've noticed is that certain eye positions are kind of connected to the memories people want to process, or emotions people want to process. So I was talking about that change triangle earlier, and it seems like with brain spotting, it kind of circumvents a lot of what someone does to avoid experiencing emotion. It kind of takes them right in to the memory or to the emotion in a very focused way. So they'll kind of, someone will kind of talk about what they want to work on. They'll notice how that feels, and they'll notice where they look in their visual field that brings that to the focus. And then, it allows them to process whatever feelings and sensations and memories or thoughts come up around that topic. And it helps them process it to completion. So they might have had pent up emotion or pain in their body that is being released through this modality that they just weren't able to access through other types of therapies they've tried. And you can use it kind of, there's a few ways like brain spotting therapists can use it. A couple of the main ways, one is by seeing where a client organically looks as they're talking about something and having them keep their awareness there. Or another way is to use kind of an extendable pointer. You can imagine that, a kind of extended pointer wand, and having them look at the tip of the pointer and then using that to cross their visual field. And they keep an eye on that pointer, and they notice like at what point they're in their visual field, they feel things a little bit more. So it's a really incredible therapy, and it's very healing based. So the purpose is to kind of like help them completely process what they need to process so that their emotional pain is freed up.
It is just so interesting. I remember when you first mentioned it to me, I was like, I want to really try this. And I wonder if you could do like a group workshop with me on it.
Yeah, I will. So I'm continuing my training in it. And you know what? I'm going to get more supervision in it, and I'm going to do additional trainings, and I will totally get back to you to see if that's a possibility. Because it would be how amazing would that be for multiple people to reap the benefits of it?
Because I know that you had said it's easier for someone to do that for you, right? But there might be some way that you can do it on yourself as well, at least initially, just to kind of see and just be curious about, where am I looking? It requires you to become very acutely aware of how you're feeling, and really just anchors you into the present moment.
Right. Yeah. And I think it probably depends on, like the level of what someone's experiencing. But if someone's feeling like their emotions are relatively manageable, and they wanted to try to kind of incorporate, eye movements in their self-work. Yeah. I mean, I would imagine that like even, if someone's journaling about something that they wanted to unpack, and they just know, they could notice like, where in my visual field do I look when I'm having this feeling come up? And just like keeping their eyes on that part of their visual field that brings that emotion or feeling more into focus, that could maybe help them break through a blocking of their ability to process that.
Mm-hmm. And I was thinking you could also just record yourself too.
Yeah, say more about that.
Record yourself. So you could just film yourself. Like you could, think a couple different things that you want to work through, or just one thing. And you would just like, film yourself like, and watch the video to see like where you're looking in the room.
Yeah, that would be a way for someone to gain, a lot of awareness of that. And I will say, I think I really value and I think it kind of, another thing I'm thinking too with, and we can kind of, infuse, things we learn from therapy into our self-work. But I do have to say, I think the relationship is a huge component to what's healing about it. What I was learning was there's a lot of attunement in it where, the therapist who's doing brain spotting is kind of tracking the client and noticing kind of where their physical sensations go, where their emotions go, where their mind wanders to. And they call it like following in the tail of the comet. Like you are just like following this person through and through. So I think it provides this sort of, it's a cool, like, really cool imagery with that.
Yeah, definitely.
And what I think and what really can happen is that someone has that like relational safety to process things, and they feel really held in that space. So I would say like, I definitely like highly recommend, like trying brain spotting if your intuition leads you there. If you're out there and your intuition leads you there and you do like your research on it. And, but I'm sure these, elements of this can be like incorporated into self-work. I just can't fully speak to like the effectiveness of that.
Yes, of course. I think it's always very helpful to have someone guide you because they see what you can't see. But one thing that people like constantly tell me, and we know this about the system, is that it can get very expensive. Not all insurance will cover all your therapy sessions. A lot of times it'll just cover up to a couple a year.
Yes. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. So like
We're
what?
facing a lot of like disparities with
Yeah.
healthcare and like accessing services. I completely agree.
So what are some things that you could like recommend someone do in like starting their own self-healing process? Like maybe a
Mhm.
book that you really enjoyed, or one of the first techniques or tools that you started using, whether it was that inverted triangle or something else, just something like people can take away after listening to this episode and say, I think I'll try that next. We've mentioned a couple different things, but just something else that comes to mind for you.
Yeah, surely. So I would say um, a couple books that are aligned with like the way I practice therapy. So if someone's listening to this and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I totally understand how like it's important to like process emotions and like kind of find my authentic self and kind of get that emotional compass back." There's a couple, a few self-help books in that style of therapy that I found really helpful. Um, the one that got me into like learning more about the type of therapy is it's called It's Not Always Depression: Working the Change Triangle to Listen to the Body, Discover Core Emotions, and Connect to Your Authentic Self. And that's
Um,
by Hilary Jacobs Hendel.
oh, that was one book.
I know, right? It is. Yep, one book. The short of it is that you could call it It's Not Always Depression.
Okay, so there's that book. Any other books?
Yeah. And then another AEDP faculty member, Dr. Ron Frederick, and that one's by Hilary Jacobs Hendel. And then another faculty member, Dr. Ron Frederick, published a couple of books. One is Living Like You Mean It, and the other one is Loving Like You Mean It. And both those are also really great books for kind of navigating this, like leaning into emotions and getting back in touch with your core self. So, and one of the Living Like You Mean It is kind of like living your general life and through this kind of lens. And then the Loving Like You Mean It is applying this to relationships. And that's like his newer book. And both of those are spectacular as well.
Okay, great. I know that a book is always one of the easiest ways to learn about something new and to do something that you're a little bit unsure about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then, I would say I think meditative practices can be so helpful. And there's, as you were saying earlier, there's now a lot of content out there that people can kind of gravitate towards, by different healers. So I would say, if someone does a little bit of research on meditation, it can be so helpful to kind of come back to the present moment and to have it so that we're not living in the future or the past. We're kind of really in touch with the now. And so really finding, as we were saying earlier, like finding your fit of like, someone who, it has like a meditation practice you can subscribe to. For instance, I follow one by Tara Brach. She's a clinical psychologist who also practices like Buddhist meditation. And she wrote a book like Radical Compassion and Radical Acceptance. And so like her voice and her style of meditation that really fits with me. So I would say, like finding, like a meditation practice can be so helpful. And there's a couple apps out there too. And yeah, so I would say do your research on the apps as well.
This is what I tell people all the time. I'm like, meditate, meditate, meditate. I don't know how many other ways that I can explain the importance of meditation, but people, who come on the podcast mention it a lot. It's part of their rituals and their daily routines. And so I'd love to know, how do you start and end the day so that you feel your best?
Right. So wait, anecdotally, what I do or what I would offer someone to do?
Oh, anecdotally, just like kind of, do you meditate in the morning? Do you go for a run? I always love to ask people what
Yes.
their rituals are.
Yeah. So I walk like an hour in the morning with my dog. And so I walk around the neighborhood. Um, and just taking it in. So, gives me like gives me like exercise, spend time with my dog. And we have a lot of trees around, and so it really gets me outside, getting fresh air in the morning, getting me moving. And then I also I have a subscription to a yoga practice. It's like I go through like glow.com, and I'm not affiliated with any of these things I'm talking about, by the way. There's no affiliation here, but yeah, I'll do like different forms of yoga in the morning too. And not that at this point, it's probably not every day. It's probably like 3 to 4 days a week. But I think these kind of ways of getting my body moving and getting my mind and my body on the same page are very helpful. And then what I find before bed is that, especially as a therapist and just a person who tries to be as in touch as possible with kind of my emotional experience, I'll notice that sometimes I want my like analytical mind or like my rational mind to kind of catch up with all of those experiences I've had in a day. So I will journal and put words to kind of what I was experiencing in the day. And it really helps me to integrate, my mind and my body of like what I experienced and like what my felt sense of the day was. So it's kind of this meeting between my right brain and my left brain.
Beautiful. I love journaling. I try to journal in the morning and the evening, and it's really made all the difference in my mental health.
Yes. I love it. Love a good journal.
And my last question for you is, do you have a quote that you really love sharing with people, or a quote that you constantly refer to in your own life?
Yeah, one that really gives me like a soft, when, I'm feeling like a sense of, we can get so hard on ourselves for, when we feel like we're falling short of our goals, or even when we feel like we're having more stress or anxiety and we should be better at navigating it. I really like this quote by Carl Rogers, and he's a psychotherapist. He was a psychotherapist who, was just very, very, very caring person, and really brought that into his work. But the quote is, the curious paradox is that when I accept myself as I am, then I can change.
That's so powerful. Can you say it again?
Yeah, of course. The curious paradox is that when I accept myself as I am, then I can change.
Ryan shared a lot of wonderful information, especially for those who've never really thought about therapy and only recently really focused on their mental health. I hope you've learned new techniques to help you self-heal, and also some insights on how to choose a therapist, a psychiatrist, psychologist, a shaman, a healer. I think the number one takeaway is how you feel with the practitioner, no matter which modality. Always focus on how you feel after a session. It'll guide you to finding the right person for you. If you haven't joined the monthly membership, what are you waiting for? There are tons of workshops for 2021 coming up in December. Every month there are healing sessions for sound bath meditation, chakra healing yoga, monthly intention setting meditations, workbooks, and so much more. It's really a wonderful resource that will help you keep accountable because we have classes every single month. And don't worry if you can't make the session. All sessions are recorded so you can also view them at your own pace whenever you have time. One of the best things about the monthly membership are the exclusive events. I poll the members on what they want to learn about and create a workshop just for them. Check the show notes for more information, and I hope to see you in the monthly membership soon.